Okay, good day everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of third-party risk management webinars. My name's Duncan Reid, I'm Marketing Manager for DVV Solutions. Today we're delighted to be joined by our partner OneTrust to take a look at how to align third-party risk strategies across multiple risk domains. Just a few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. To help reduce any background noise or interference during the session, we have placed all attendees on mute. However, this session is being recorded and will be made available as soon as possible. We have allowed a little bit of time for Q&A during this webinar. You can submit questions at any time using the Q&A button within your Zoom window. Where possible, we'll try to address these as we go along, but we'll, if we're unable to, bring them up during that Q&A session at the end. And with that, please allow me to first introduce Kerry Davidson, who's kindly stepped in at the last minute in place of our original panelist, Jamin Desai. Kerry serves as a senior manager for OneTrust, advising companies throughout their third-party risk management implementations to help meet requirements relating to relevant standards, frameworks, laws, and regulations. Kerry's helped numerous Fortune 500 clients to centralize their third-party information across business units, assess risks and performance, and monitor these threats throughout the entire supplier lifecycle. For those of you who don't know him, may I also introduce Sean O'Brien, Director of DVV Solutions. Sean's a practicing third-party risk professional and assessor with over 25 years hands-on experience. In addition to the day job, Sean is a founding member of the EMEA Steering Committee for the Shared Assessments Programme and sits on their Best Practices Committee, providing a Eurocentric perspective into the development of global standards and practices for third-party risk frameworks. I think, Sean, it would be handy if you could just do a little bit of scene setting for us. I know we've prepared a couple of slides for you, just to give us an idea of where we sit currently within the third-party risk landscape.
Yes, certainly. Thanks very much, Duncan, and good afternoon, everyone. So from a third-party risk perspective, most people tend to start in focus around the cyber domain of information security and privacy and operational resiliency. But certainly on the back of the pandemic, we're seeing a significant growth in interest in the financial side of things and additional things to monitor. All right. We've also seen the emergence of certainly ESG in the past 12 to 18 months as a combined risk domain, environmental, social governance. So if you're from the US side of the pond, there's probably much more of a focus on DEI and diversity, equality and inclusion. Whereas if you're in UK and Europe, you're going to be seeing much more on the greenhouse gas side of things and TCFD reporting. So this slide just covers some of the latest news articles that we've seen driving third-party risk and the diversity of the number of risk domains you now need to monitor. It's growing exponentially, both in relation to yourselves and not just your third parties. Certainly with ESG, you needing to go much deeper, fourth, fifth, sixth end parties, and also consider carbon usage, all right, beyond your environment and into your customer environment as well. So we've seen a rapidly changing landscape here. That's about it from me, I think, Duncan. If there's anything else you want me to add?
No, it's a good bit of scene setting, but I guess the question to Kerry is, with obviously this expanding universe of supply chains and influences on it, as Sean says, beyond cyber, what's the view from OneTrust as to how we start to pull all this together?
Yeah. It's a fair question. I think I've put together a few slides here to address that specific question. So we'll kind of make our way. But before I kick off, if there's any questions from the room, the panelists, anybody that wants to chime in and even answer somewhere and add some input, I highly encourage it. It should be interactive as much as possible. But yeah, so to kind of go off that last point, when we think about third-party risk management, there really are several core risk domains or focus areas that we really look at, including security. When you think about information security or cybersecurity, privacy, ethics, compliance, and even environmental social governance. And when you look across these, really the big risk is unknown across each of these domains. And so if we can collaborate across these silos, you can really grow your business more quickly and really be prepared for some of the things that you may have not been before. And so when I mention those domains, within those domains, there are dozens of laws and requirements, standards, and frameworks that organizations must pass down to their vendors, including, from a security perspective, like NIST or ISO or PCI DSS, et cetera, or from privacy, GDPR, CCPA, or LGPD. When we think about ethics and compliance, maybe AML or PEP screening and sanctions or Modern Slavery Act. There's also a growing pressure from other areas. When you think about institutional investors, the scrutiny from those investors is becoming more common, especially in this environmental social governance space. They are looking at a variety of risks, when we think about consumers or sustainable developmental goals or Paris Climate Agreement or the EU non-financial reporting derivative. All of these are parts of requirements that are going not just across security, but of privacy, ethics, and ESG that's now evolving. And so this pressure, as I mentioned, is extending much beyond even the regulatory compliance, right? And it extends to our investors, our consumers, our employees. For consumers, they're becoming increasingly skeptical of what brands they engage with, especially when it comes to like commoditized goods. Being that trusted brand gives you that competitive advantage with consumers nowadays. When we think about employees, today, employees largely have more choice of how and where and what they work on, meaning that they can be very selective about what brands that they represent. And so we have individuals that have an increased focus on their personal brand, and that aligns with not only where they shop as a consumer, but also companies that they choose to work for. And so when we even think about trust as a valued asset, we're now seeing, investors, really, start to focus on this. When we think about, I think I read some sort of article the other day where, big consulting firms are really looking at how we collect carbon emission data from its client vendors, and trust and brand reputation, especially when it comes to carbon emissions, are becoming board level initiatives and have direct impact or effects on investors' willingness to put more money into organizations that they want to invest in. So we are kind of seeing this go beyond just regulatory compliance. It's embedded in our investors, our consumers, our employees. And so when we look across these different elements, when we go to look at the risks, there's usually different processes, there's different tools, there's motivations that are different, and even risks are different across all of these different elements. And so we need board members, CEOs are tending to move to try to think about these silos together. How can we get CEOs and board level members comprehensive views across all of these risk domains for all of our different vendors that we're working with and within our organization? Because ultimately, we care about growing the business. So traditionally, we really looked at security and privacy, but now there's this enhanced focus on ethics and ESG that we need to be working together, not because of these regulatory compliance or the risk, but because the reason should be to collaborate to grow the business ultimately. It goes back to what I said, it's around being around your brand awareness, being that trusted brand awareness kind of brings all of this back together beyond just regulatory compliance, beyond just what your consumers think. How do we bring it all together? And so when we think about that idea of our reputation, it's traditionally been looked at as our relationship with our vendors. We've been focused, really primarily in the cybersecurity and privacy space for the past 5 or 10 years. But now, as I mentioned, there's more risk vectors than ever. We have more reasons to do evaluations of our vendors than we did before. As I mentioned more recently with ethics and ESG, those have come to the forefront of third-party risk management programs and has led to a mind shift from just simply third-party risk management to this bigger idea of third-party trust management. And so what we'll kind of learn today is in this session is we'll look at the new components that make up third-party trust management. In addition to just third-party risk management, how should we be looking at third-party due diligence or supplier sustainability and responsibility, all of which impact our brand, and we need to associate with a plethora of the third parties that we interact with out there. And so again, I'll go back to it all saying is that it all goes back to our reputation and how we build that reputation, because we can lose it within seconds. It takes us years to build this brand and reputation, but news and things that happen in the news, doesn't affect, when we hear about third party or supply chain ethics. If this happens to your third parties, I think one story comes to mind is Starbucks, where they were working with their supplier, their fourth party or even fifth party supplier of beans that was engaging in child labor, and so all of these things, that fourth party or fifth party, they didn't make the headlines. You make the headlines. The big brands make the headlines, and so the trust across these issues becomes even more important, because again, if you want to go back to the reputation, who we're engaging with, we're not going to be able to point the finger at them when we do have these issues. We have to take that on in how we're managing them. So I'll kind of pause and just make sure there's no questions coming in that I can address so far before I jump into some of the best practice we can look at when managing our vendors or our portfolio of managers today, of vendors today.
I think, Carey, if I can just kind of comment on a couple of things you said there. You hit the nail right on the head there in terms of certainly, the carbon consumption down the supply chain. All right, it's pretty easy to find that information out from your laptop or your server supplier. All right, that tends to be written on the side of the box these days. But when you start looking at some of the more diverse requirements you've got to build and drive your business, that information just isn't available, from small suppliers. They don't know what that is. So that's a real challenge that around ESG, and particularly around the greenhouse gas side of things is the industry's facing at the moment. So really good point. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I appreciate that. And it gave me a chance to get some water, but I totally agree. I think that's, again, what we're seeing in general is that it's, ESG and sort of this concept is, it's new, it's brand new, and it's taken the world by storm, much like we saw privacy before that, and much like we saw security even before that. It's just, we kind of see the wave coming. So diving into some of the best practices that we see is the first step is that we got to really bring everybody together. We have to figure out what's acceptable to our business and how we define trust to our organization. It starts with really kind of formalizing that committee to help review the processes that we go with vendors. The domains are different. The thought process is different. So who's going to own the risk of the vendor? All this needs to be driven through procurement process, or does it need to be driven through a contracting where a lot of this due diligence and assessments are happening today? How do we include our information security review, our finance review? Again, all these decisions are, how do we bring this together to help bring the decision-making together? Risk comes from decision-making, and if you don't have the right information, you're making decisions without the right information. And we need to get everybody kind of going in the same direction on what matters. And so there's going to be trade-offs at the end of the day. What are you going to base your decisions on? You might make decisions that serve one function over the other. One thing I think about is like Patagonia, for example. If they want to, and I'm not saying this is what they do, I'm just saying as an example, is that maybe they want to think about their risk, or maybe they want to work with a company that has a higher, lower ESG risk, but they want to give up a little bit of the security risk that comes with that because of where their morals or how they define trust as their organization. The next part of this is to kind of really, again, go back to that example I just used of Patagonia, is to find what is our risk appetite going to be across these domains. What are those company priorities? Are we a manufacturer or retailer? Is ESG going to be important to us? How are we going to manage those fourth parties? Or do we want to think that ESG is more important to us, or privacy and security? what is going to be your weighted scale across these different domains, and how do you implement and measure that and report on that becomes even more and more important. And so kind of going back to that Patagonia, maybe we do want to give up something from a risk appetite that serves our ESG and mission statement more than we want to sacrifice for our security. So Sam, any comments there? And I see you shaking your head. Or anybody from the line, anybody agree, disagree, or have any questions around this?
Certainly from my side, Gary, I think yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. The great thing that we tend to advocate is really building a comprehensive framework so everybody knows where they stand, and the points you're making, in terms of overall risk appetite at organizational level are critical, and then looking at how that flows down in terms of inherent risk, supplier by supplier, risk tier by risk tier. All right, exactly the right way to think about it. I think that the hardest part will be getting the metrics right. So you're going to be comparing eggs with eggs across the different risk domains. All right. But that's probably a discussion for another presentation.
Or this one. I mean, if we kind of roll back into it, we can't treat all of our vendors equal, right? And so when we think about these vendors, we have to take these things into consideration. Are we sharing proprietary, confidential business information with this vendor? Are we sharing personal data with this vendor? Is it sensitive personal data? What's the critical bit of business function? Does it disrupt or affect our business if this information's accessed? We can't just take a common line across all of our vendors and measure all of them as, they're all equals. They're not all going to be treated equal. We have to understand, how do we tier them? What provides most risk? Does, again, that ESG component become more important to you? And is that high risk versus a security, or switch that, vice versa? So we have to really understand this stuff, and we have to automate what we do to capture this information, right? We have to automate and use technology that's out there to help, manage the process and workflows that we need to, get a vendor from onboarding to conducting the assessments, to doing the risk mitigation, to, the reporting and dashboarding, and all the way to offboarding, right? When they're done working with us, how do we make sure we're not still exchanging obligations or something like that? So we need technology today more than ever. You need technology to help automate what you're working on today in a workflow manner. And you need to be able to conduct multiple workflows in parallel at the same time. And those workflows may vary based on the risk, as I mentioned before, that third party presents to you. And so with all of this combined, this is where I see the most effective need, or the most successful organizations that are combining this, the ones that understand that they do have more vendors today than they have before. How do we automate the onboarding and ultimately make it faster to onboard these vendors, to increase the bottom line, to increase revenue, grow our business? And how can we run them in parallel to save time? And then how do we manage those risks in a tiered fashion? And a lot of it takes a look at how you're conducting your assessments. Thousands of vendors, suppliers, third parties out there, and all of those vendors have varying degree of criticality and risk that I've already mentioned. So this one size fits all assessments, it really becomes a labor intensive and slows down the business. So without that technology and these in-depth assessments that have logic built into, based on, are you exchanging personal information or not? And that bringing up a different list of questions and saving our business time and energy, all goes down to, making this more efficient for our business and faster to grow the business ultimately at the end of the day. So key takeaways, the categories of risk and trust are really ever evolving for organizations today. And there are more stakeholders involved in making in addressing these risks than there were ever. And then what it ultimately comes down to is you have to define what trust means to your business. In a modern world, we outsource products and services that we no longer want to build on our own as a company. It's more effective today, it's cost effective, usually renders better results to buy a more focused solution that aids in running our business versus slowing down our business. So what this means is we have to establish trust with more organizations than we ever had before, as mentioned, and there's more people involved in establishing that trust. So it's not just about the risk anymore, especially when it comes to security and privacy. it's about a brand reputation and being trusted organization to different stakeholders of trust. So yeah. So any questions, comments, concerns before I dive into a little bit about what OneTrust has to offer, and then we can get into Q&A?
All good from me, Kerry.
All right. Today, OneTrust has a third-party risk management solution to help manage your third parties. We offer a third-party trust kind of management platform that can address multiple different risk disciplines, including third-party due diligence. We can offer, we have a program that helps with the initial ethics and compliance screening against sanctions lists, watch lists, adverse media, the third-party risk component, the third-party risk component of security and privacy to conduct in-depth security and privacy based on assessments and really kind of manage the end-to-end life cycle of that. And then back down to the supplier sustainability and responsibility to really assess and report on ESG risks within the supply chain. And so the second part of this is for vendors. So the first part is us managing, assessing our vendors that we work with. The flip of that is, what about people? What do we do for organizations that are being, assessed for as vendors and have to constantly, fill out these assessments and address these risks? We have more. We've built what we call I guess what we've done here is we've for vendors, to more efficiently build trust with customers, we've built this trust suite for vendors, which consists of our questionnaire response automation tool to process requests and automatically answer those questionnaires faster. The trust profile, which can be a single source of truth for your security, privacy, and compliance details, and be able to share those securely with customers and prospects. And so we're able to offer these solutions from both sides of the house and really bring them together with our exchange community, which is a vendor-driven community that brings together both sides of the third-party risk equation, both from you assessing vendors and your vendors, right, into a central information marketplace. And so what this community-based approach enables is a seamless information and assessment sharing between you and your vendors. And the exchange uses the shared assessment, SIG assessment, as the standard assessment to map across all of these 18 risk domains. So yeah, and that's, really the OneTrust solution today. I hope that's kind of addressed all these requirements that we came here to look at today. I'll kind of turn it back to Q&A and to Sean and the rest of the team to discuss.
Super, thanks, Kerry. Duncan, do we have any questions, sir?
That's good. Yeah, we had a couple that were provided as part of the delegate registration. Sometimes they're quite specific and indicate the particular challenges that somebody might be having at that point in time. So to kick off with, how are or should fourth party cloud service providers such as AWS or MS Azure risks be assessed and managed where they provide an infrastructure service to a third party who has direct contact with the client? So could the cloud provider provide assurance to the third party flow down to the client?
Do you want me to kick off with that, Kerry?
Yeah, go for it, sure.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
Okay. So, so the issue you've got with the fourth party is you typically don't have a contract, so you've got no right to audit. So that's your primary challenge. So from a questionnaire or an on-site assessment perspective, you're going to struggle with that. So a lot of the cloud service providers provide completed questionnaires. Certainly, Microsoft has moved significantly towards a fully completed SIG over the past 12 months. But both those organisations mentioned and most of the other ones have a stock response to answer most people's initial questionnaires. Although I must admit, AWS is a challenge in terms of an on-site assessment. I'm only aware of one organisation globally who's ever been able to do that. So, and that was European Central Bank. All right. So, so there are some challenges there. So how do you deal with it? Well, if you're a third party, all right, and you've got a contract with the third party, then you need to try and ensure that you have flow down terms in your contract with your third party that are forced to flow down into the fourth party. So if there are certain security controls, certain access rights, those kind of things, make sure they're in your contract and make sure that the SaaS provider, whoever you're dealing with, is the front end to the cloud service provider, all right, is going to flow those down in contract to that platform provider as well. The second thing you can do is you can assess your third party risk assessment process. All right. So is your supplier carrying out the same level of due diligence, same kind of questions that you are carrying out in relation to your third party with their third party or fourth party? All right. So that's the second part of the answer to the question. And then the third side is that there are an awful lot of continuous monitoring tools out there that utilize public domain information. So traditionally, in terms of cyber security, but now there are an awful lot out there covering financial, operational risk, ESG, so on and so forth. There's quite a broad plethora of offerings out there. So and because they're based on public domain information, all right, then you tend to find that they're able to provide information for those fourth, fifth, and nth parties. But ultimately, you can also use them for other things. You could use them for monitoring some of your investment portfolio. You could use them for gathering information about pre-M&A, pre-merger and acquisition about organizations. And equally, we touched on, post exiting from a relationship, there may still be some residual data there. So you may still want to be able to monitor that on a third, fourth, or nth party, all right, just to ensure that that data is being retained for warranty purposes or whatever and is being kept secure. So again, your contract's terminated. How do you cover that off? So those continuous monitoring tools tend to fulfill that side of things. So that's it from my side, Duncan. Kerry, have you got anything to add there, sir?
Yeah. Sorry, having trouble with the mute button again, but Alt-A. So I think the only thing I would add to that is that's what the need for this, the exchange, I think is a common place for these bigger and more, commonly requested vendors that we work with, like AWS. How do we make it easier for them, right? Maybe they can have a trust profile that has all these, assessments, certifications that we can easily, request and get, so they don't have to, continually to fill them out or to, continually provide, answers to customized assessments. I'll also say it provides more of the need to standardize. We got to get away. I think the market has an appetite, even when we look across privacy, security, ESG, ethics, that we are looking for a standardized framework, as opposed to everybody looking for customized, but how do we, standardize it across maybe SIG? And I think that's sort of the big benefit of a SIG, is that it does map to all these risk domains like NIST, ISO, and FedRAMP, et cetera. How do we get that same level of standardization across these other, areas that make it, that impact us too across our vendors? And then even more important, how do we standardize across all of it, right? And I think that's where the market will eventually head. But those are sort of my two things. How do we make this information sharing more easy, more repeatable, less time consuming for our vendors and for us to conduct it? And then how do we standardize, right? I think because that's what the market really wants to do at the end of the day, is standardize on something versus trying to figure it out on their own and eventually getting dinged on something for not thinking about it in the right way.
Hey, great answers, Kerry. And yeah, with my shared assessments hat on, I can confirm that the SIG is expanding as we speak to take into account a lot more ESG questions. There are some in there already, all right, and there are a lot of discussions around the ever expanding risk domains, and the SIG is certainly planned on keeping pace with the rate of change there. Not just SIG, but also the on-site assessment, the SCA as well. So yeah, that's really good. Duncan, I've just seen a question come in from one of our audience. Do you offer a competitor to BitSite or integrate with a BitSite? So if I answer that from DVV's perspective, and then let Kerry answer it from a OneTrust perspective, yes, we're a BitSight service provider, but we also have a host of other cyber and non-cyber offerings in relation to continuous monitoring, and all of our offerings integrate with OneTrust. All right. Yeah, Connor, if you'd like to take that conversation offline, I'm sure we can follow it up and have a more detailed chat about your requirements there. So thank you for the question. Kerry, anything to add in relation to that?
No, I think the way I'll answer it is that I think it's an important question. BitSight is one of those, but all of these areas are, right? When you think about anti-monitoring, AML, or these sanction lists that are out there, there's tons of monitoring based on the industry that you're in that you'd want to follow or integrate with. And yes, OneTrust even has something similar. We have partnerships out there, and it's part of making your program better is that you want to have all this information talking to each other seamlessly through your organization. And so the short answer is yes. The long answer would be yes, and whatever we offer, we also offer both. And it's not in competition. I would kind of take that word out there. It's sort of based on what's your need, what's your focus, what's important, how do you define trust for your organization, and then what do you want to see on continuous monitoring fronts? And if BitSight's one of those, we can support that. If it's something that OneTrust offers, we can support that. And I think to whatever Sean said, we can support all of it, and all of it's supported by OneTrust. So yeah, we can certainly take that conversation offline. I hope that helps. And
OneTrust have an open API process in place, so if it isn't integrated, it isn't overly complicated to get it integrated.
Yeah, I'll say with any vendor, most vendors out there today in the software world will say that they're built on an open API framework. The truth is, OneTrust has a lot of plugins as well, and I think I think that's sort of the important part is that anybody can put integrations in a room, and you get a lot of smart people to work it all out, and that's what open API basically means. I think with a lot of those things that you've seen out there, like BitSight and security scorecard and all the other major ones out there, they're already plugged in. We're ready to go. It's just a matter of hooking it in and turning it on. So again, great question. But yeah.
Hey, Duncan, anything else?
Yeah. So taking a couple of steps back and away from, I guess, the cyber element, is how effective can a vendor questionnaire be as part of ESG risk management?
Yeah, I think I can take that one first. I think it's still evolving, right? I think, much like we saw privacy, 4 or 5 years ago, people were asking, I think, the same questions. How effective can we be with that today? I think it's starting to evolve, and I think the right questions are being asked. And I think that the market is tending to really kind of put out there what's important. I think when we think about carbon emission and how do we measure our carbon footprint and how do other organizations do it, it's still, in my opinion, it still remains to be determined. Yeah, I don't have a much better answer than otherwise. I think it's still being determined. I think you can get some baseline facts today, but it's still an evolving sort of market for anybody.
I think you're quite right. I think the first thing to say is that an awful lot of organizations have already been doing a lot of ESG for a number of years. Modern Slavery Act, Anti-Bribery Act from the UK perspective, equality, diversity and inclusion, all right, sanctions lists, all of those things. A lot of organizations have been doing, taking that information from OECD and places like that. All right. So, don't think of ESG as this big new shiny. It's an amalgamation of a lot of stuff you're doing already, just with a lot more focus on environmental. All right. So environmental is the challenging part. And as Kerry quite rightly points out, all right, it is legislation and regulation is changing fairly rapidly. Fortunately, it does globally seem to be changing in the same direction, which helps. All right. But what are you trying to achieve there? All right. The intention to be much more environmentally aware should be tied to your risk appetite. It should be tied to what you're publicly claiming. And, if you're setting your credentials out as a very green company, ensuring that both yourselves and your supply chain conform to that or are working towards it. All right. But how do you measure it? Well, there are limited metrics out there at the moment. Certainly in the UK, there's a number of legislations and adoptions around TCFD, all right, that are pushing it forward fairly quickly. But that information tends to be published on a corporate's website. as an annual sustainability report. They're typically retrospective of the year that's just gone. All right. And ultimately what you really want to know is, have they signed up for the Paris Climate Accord, and where are they in relation to their climate action plan on that agreed plan, and does it look like it's in scope to meet the requirements? All right. That information still needs some calculation, all right, and is extremely subjective. That's the honest opinion, really. So, and there are still challenges down the food chain, as we were talking about earlier, in terms of identifying, how much carbon is utilized in the manufacture of a subcomponent that you may be using in your business. All right, that information is quite frequently not available, and it is a major challenge at this time.
Okay, thanks, guys. Another question: what are the best risk metrics or information that I should be providing my board?
That's a really good question. As ever, it's the how long is a piece of string question. It depends. All right. So if you are a third-party risk practitioner or managing a program, I would kind of step back from that question and say, well, what's the route to the board? All right. What particular path is it taking through the business? All right. Who on the board am I presenting that information to? Are they able to articulate that information in a language that is appropriate? There's no point taking IT risk to the board. The board don't speak IT risk. All right. So look at how you translate that into business risk in terms of, potential likelihood, potential cost, and interruption to business figures. And also, and look at how long you've got to deliver the appropriate information and message you want to get across, and then shape it accordingly. All right. So, what metrics do we need to gather? All right. Depends on, your risk appetite in relation to each of these risk domains. All right. So going back to the heat maps and the heat map overlays that Kerry did on the slide a few slides ago. All right. And then delivering that in a format that is appropriate for the audience it needs to be delivered to, that will get the message across in a timely manner. All right. And I'm a great advocate, as a picture speaks 1,000 words. All right. Just make sure you've got the stats to allow you to drill down afterwards when they ask some more detailed questions. All right. But that's it from my side.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll answer. I can go through the presentation again. But ultimately, it's going to depend on the company, right? And how you define it. And I would say is, it should be based on your committee, how you've collaborated with these different silos, and how you define risk as a whole to grow the business, not just your segment, right? So when we think about, if you're part of security today, if you're going to your board, you have to take into consideration that they're looking at it from, as mentioned, across privacy, security, ethics, and ESG. So I think it's on your, and they're ultimately trying to just say, what grows our business, what keeps our brand reputation great. If you don't have those other elements, if you haven't collaborated with these other parts of the business, if you haven't established how your risk is defined by other risks, then I think you're missing a big part of what you're going to your board with, and what ultimately they want to know, which is, how is this intertwined with our DNA versus just a siloed problem? What's the more global solution to our business? And then that is what the metrics I think they're looking to solve for is, okay, great. Now that we understand our global, risk and across all these domains, these are the metrics I want to see that relates to those, about how we're improving that or addressing that from a business standpoint.
Yeah, and we're not saying that is at all easy to achieve. All right, it's almost back to the architectural model of third-party risk. All right, it's typically quite siloed. We see a lot of organizations who are just dealing with cyber in relation to third-party risk. We see financials dealt with, typically by procurement. All right, some of the operational risks may be a little bit more involved in cyber now, depends on what particular vertical market you're operating in. So, that it is the right way to go to mature your program, to have a steering committee, to have a uniform risk model and uniform risk appetites, and to work through these multiple risk domains in relation to your suppliers, running down through the tiers. all right? But don't think that's where you're going to start out, because nobody starts out there. And even the biggest companies are still significantly struggling with how to do this, all right? It is a really big ask. So, my advice is, start small, keep it simple, but have a clear idea of what direction you're going to go into, and slowly but steadily get there. But we're not talking months either, we're talking years to mature your program to that level.
Okay, thanks, guys. This might be more pointed towards Kerry, but I'm sure Sean will have a view. How does the platform enable me to illustrate compliance?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think when you say the word compliance, I think that's going to also mean many different things to many different people. When we talk about, are we board compliant? Are we audit compliant? Are we, federally compliant? All these things are going to be what we take into measure our compliance. And so what the tool enables you to do is to go back to what I said before is you need technology today, especially with the amount of vendors that we're working with, to streamline this process. When you think about what goes into just onboarding a vendor, you have to, conduct assessments. You have to know the right questions to ask. You have to know what the answers to those questions mean. You have to understand the risks that they pose. You have to collect all of that and come up with a plan to mitigate. And then you have to put all that information together and demonstrate that to board members, and even worse, to compliant officials when they get audited, maybe from a privacy perspective, if you're in lieu of GDPR, or for a security perspective from a breach, and they're doing their due diligence. It's going to be based on your requirement. Like, what did we do? How did we assess risk? How did we go back and try to mitigate this? Because that's ultimately what people are going to come back and ask for, is what did you do about it? What are the records that prove it? Look, just because you say that you do it, if you can't prove that you do it, it's very irrelevant. And so especially when you come with auditors, when they come and ask for information, it's about giving them the right information, not too much information, not too little information, the right information. And being in board members, again, they also care about what is all this information, and we don't want to give them too much or too little. We want to give everybody the information they're asking for. Today, you need technology to be able to conduct the assessments, to be able to understand what those assessments are providing, to be able to demonstrate compliance to your board members, and to track all this information in case these audits should come. And so OneTrust as a whole can definitely help you do that from end to end with your onboarding your vendors, managing the life cycle of those vendors. But I think more importantly is more of our mission to make this more of a community-driven approach, right? These are things that are getting repeated over and over and over again. And we're conducting the same assessments on the same vendors, and the vendors that are filling them out are getting the same assessments that they have to fill out. How do we make all this information more of a Facebook, a LinkedIn, where we can easily find the information we want to go to, connect with those businesses, and get the information we want to? All that to be said is kind of going back to what the question was. OneTrust helps with all of that, whether you're a vendor being assessed, whether you're trying to manage your vendors, or whether you just want a community to measure against, or to brainstorm with, or to see what other people think. All of that's available through the tool. So it depends on where you focus and the maturity of your business, but we can help with everything when it comes to third-party due diligence and third-party trust. But if you, again, happy to take these conversations offline and better, show you with our team where the platform stands today.
And I think, the question's quite telling, actually, Duncan. How do you prove compliance is really interesting, because if you think about the nature of a questionnaire, the questionnaire is a trust model. You're trusting that your supplier, your third party or nth party, is completing that questionnaire honestly and completely. And in reality, it's at a minimum aspirationally, and sometimes it's not at all truthful. All right. So you can supplement that by asking for some supporting evidence to help substantiate some of that. But ultimately, if you're not happy with that, the answers of trust as proof of compliance, then you need to go and prove that they are actually operating in the method, following the processes and procedures. So you're actually going to have to go and test those policies and processes within the third party, and that's where an on-site, or as we've all been carrying out for the past 18 months, 2 years now, virtual on-site assessments take place. All right, and that's the verified piece of the model. All right, so if the auditors are pushing you for proofs means on-site or virtual on-site, testing procedures and processes. All right, and there's a really distinct difference there between the two. So just want to make that point.
One other point I'll make on that front goes back to what I also said, is that not all vendors are treated equally. So what do we, you got to make sure that you understand what, we're not wasting all these resources and time doing this investigation on a very low risk vendor to our business in general. So how do we understand what our vendors, who we're using, how do we tier them, and then how do we use ultimately an assessment to drive the answers we need to prove compliance, whatever that is defined by us in our organization.
Thanks, Gary.
Or our lawyers.
Thanks.
Hopefully not.
One last question, which I know we touched on in the first question, but that was obviously pointed very specifically towards cloud service providers, is how can I get more insight into the risks within downstream suppliers? So that's going to be third, I guess, and sort of fourth, fifth end parties.
So I think again, touching on it in terms of cloud service providers, the answer is pretty much the same. All right, you can audit your third parties, and you can audit the third party assessment program of your third parties in relation to the fourth parties. But typically, 9 times out of 10, you've got no right to audit anything beyond your third party. So you're relying on the public domain information from tools like BitSight and other ones that we've talked about. All right, to look at the public domain of their cyber footprint. But I would emphasise that is the public domain of that footprint of their environment. That is not all their environment. So it is, again, it's indicative of you can see known vulnerabilities within that public domain. You can see patch management processes and patch management timescales. You can look at your SSL certificates and make sure they're up to date. You can look at the privacy statements and match those against the appropriate privacy regulations. All right, and so those allow you to do that downstream. All right, but again, they are a sample. All right, they're not the utopian dreams one person once said to me. All right, that would be we have 24/7 logs of everything that we're touching and using coming directly into us, and we can see that all the time. And don't get me wrong, the marketplace may well go in that direction, slowly but steadily, but I think we're a way off that yet.
Thanks. Anything to add, Kerry?
No, I mean, I think it hits the nail on the head. I think at the end of the day, it's nothing different than what we've already you kind of spoken to today about where what we need to do with our third party. I think it comes down to, it's kind of like that controller processor, relationship. It's, we need to, it starts with the third party, right? And organizations it's a competitive advantages for most organizations. Are they looking at their people that they engage with? And are we going to choose them based on, are they doing this due diligence on the fourth parties and fifth parties that they're using when they come to the table to do business with us? And so again, because at the end of the day, when the fourth party, when there's, when that fourth party breaks some law or has some sanction against them, they're not going to, the headline is not going to be fourth party of so-and-so. It's going to be Starbucks did it, or Carrie Davidson did it, and it doesn't matter that it was somebody else that I engaged with. It's my headline. And so I think it starts with the way you get that visibility is to really do that due diligence on your third party and who are they working with and how do they grow their business and how does that affect my business? Because that's ultimately the competitive advantage. And it goes back to what I said, is that the brand is becoming that big competitive advantage for organizations, much like we saw GDPR make privacy a competitive advantage from a country perspective. You know, if people weren't in line with GDPR or didn't match it from an adequate, you couldn't compete. You couldn't do business with Europe. And it's the same thing here. You can't compete. It's a competitive advantage to be able to monitor your privacy, your security, your ESG, and the people that you hold responsible to that. You're the controller. They're just the processor. And,
you know, so the kind of final comment there is that the one thing you can't outsource is risk. All right. You can outsource every process under the sun, right? But the risk always stays with you.
That's right.
Thanks, guys. No more questions have come in, so I'm happy to move on and just, you know, take a step back and summarize from the pair of you, you know, what we can take away from today's session. Is there anything you'd like to sort of close on between you?
Gary, do you have anything to add?
No, I think again, it's more people are involved today. It's requiring more decision-making processes, more regulations are in place, more, you know, risks across different domains are in play today. And we need a comprehensive way to attack this. And in my belief, it's through technology, workflows, and kind of building a community around this at the end of the day to make it easier for the whole world to work better, to grow better, and to evolve better. So that's sort of the three key, I guess, the key takeaways from me. Sean?
Yeah, I think from me, much the same, really. You know, it is complicated. It is changing fairly rapidly. Looking at what you do now and coming up with a strategy of how you're going to not just add the next risk domain that you're being challenged with, but, you know, the one after that, one after that. All right, build that overall process into how you grow and expand, both in terms of depth through third, fourth, and nth party, but also breadth in terms of, you know, operational risk, compliance risk, geolocation, geopolitical. All right, you know, all those ever expanding risk domains as well. All right, and you know that's what we do on a day-to-day basis. So, you know, Kerry's right in terms of OneTrust. You know, OneTrust will allow you to make these processes as efficient as you possibly can, because, all right, the overheads are your risk analysts. All right, they're an expensive resource. You know, there might be cyber specialists, there might be privacy specialists. All right, you don't want them doing admin. All right, that's what the tool's there for, to automate all of that admin, so to make sure you're getting optimum value from those very expensive resources. So I think that's probably my parting commentary.
Great point.
Great, thanks very much, guys. Well, thank you everyone for attending, and we will be sending out a follow-up email out of the back of today with a copy of the slides. There'll be, as I say, it's been recorded, so there'll be a video post online as well. But for me, thank you all for your time today. I hope everyone can stay safe, and you can join us again very soon.